Some people think their beauty gives them the right to humiliate others, but they forget that knowledge is the most powerful weapon of all. What happened at that company dinner changed everything I thought I knew about power, respect, and the price of underestimating someone who has fought for every opportunity they've ever received. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I've been working as a financial analyst at Henderson Industries for 3 years. It's a mid-sized consulting firm in downtown Chicago, where the wind cuts through the streets like knives and ambition flows as freely as the coffee in our break room. The building sits on Michigan Avenue, its glass facade reflecting the dreams and frustrations of everyone who walks through its revolving doors every morning at precisely 8:30, when the security guards unlock the main entrance and another day of corporate warfare begins. Before we continue with this story that will show you how sometimes the quiet ones hold all the cards, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a like on this video. We're also running an incredible motorcycle giveaway for everyone who subscribes, likes this video, and comments letting us know where you're watching from. Don't miss your chance to win this amazing prize. I earned my master's degree in finance from Northwestern University, graduating summa cum laude despite working 2 part-time jobs to pay for my education. My parents immigrated from Mexico when I was 5, and they cleaned offices at night so I could have the opportunities they never had. Every formula I memorized, every late night I spent studying in the university library while my classmates went to parties, carried the weight of their sacrifices. My degree wasn't just a piece of paper hanging on my cubicle wall, it was proof that hard work could overcome any obstacle, that intelligence could triumph over circumstance, and that the American dream was still possible for those willing to sacrifice everything to achieve it. The journey to that degree had been anything but easy. While my wealthy classmates complained about having to take out small student loans, I was working at a campus coffee shop from 5 in the morning until my first class, then rushing to my evening job at a tutoring center that helped me pay for textbooks and basic living expenses. I lived in a tiny studio apartment 40 minutes from campus, sharing a bathroom with 3 other students and surviving on ramen noodles and whatever free food I could find at university events. But every hardship was worth it when I walked across that graduation stage, seeing my parents in the audience with tears streaming down their faces, knowing that their daughter had accomplished something they could have only dreamed of. The Chicago winter had been particularly brutal that year, with temperatures dropping below 0 for weeks on end. The city moved differently in that kind of cold. People hunched over like question marks, faces buried in scarves and hats, everyone rushing from one heated space to another as quickly as possible. Our office building's heating system struggled against the relentless wind that whipped off Lake Michigan, and I often kept a small space heater under my desk, its gentle hum becoming the soundtrack to my daily calculations and reports. The windows in our office frequently frosted over completely, creating abstract patterns that reminded me of the mathematical equations I worked with every day. My daily routine at Henderson Industries had become as predictable as the Chicago Transit Authority schedule. I arrived every morning at 7:15, a full hour before most of my colleagues, using the quiet time to review overnight market reports and prepare analysis that would inform the day's client meetings. My cubicle was positioned in the center of the main floor, surrounded by the constant hum of conversations about quarterly projections, client acquisitions, and office politics that seemed to consume everyone's attention except mine. I preferred to focus on the numbers, finding comfort in their absolute honesty and reliability, in a world where people's motivations were often hidden behind polite smiles and corporate speak. My boss, Richard Henderson, was the kind of man who wore his success like an expensive cologne, subtle but impossible to ignore. At 42, he commanded respect through a combination of sharp business acumen and old-fashioned charm that seemed to come from another era. His corner office overlooked the Chicago River, and during our monthly meetings, I often found myself momentarily distracted by the view of boats navigating the dark water below, their captains skillfully maneuvering between ice floes and commercial barges. Richard had built Henderson Industries from a small accounting firm into a respected consulting business over the course of 15 years, surviving 2 economic recessions and countless competitors who had tried to steal his clients. Despite his wealth and status, Richard had always treated me with professional respect, often praising my analytical skills in front of other employees and clients. He frequently requested my input on complex financial matters, trusting my Northwestern education and attention to detail more than colleagues who had been with the company longer but lacked my technical expertise. Our working relationship had been built on mutual respect and shared dedication to providing clients with accurate, insightful financial guidance that helped them navigate an increasingly complex business environment. That comfortable professional dynamic changed dramatically 6 months ago when he started dating Brittany Walsh, and suddenly everything I thought I understood about workplace relationships and power structures was turned completely upside down. Brittany was everything I wasn't: 24 years old, blonde, and blessed with the kind of effortless beauty that opened doors before she even had to knock. She possessed that particular brand of American attractiveness that seemed to make people stupid, causing normally intelligent individuals to stumble over their words and offer assistance she hadn't even requested. Her smile could light up a room, but I quickly learned that it could also freeze you out completely if you somehow managed to displease her or fail to show the proper level of admiration for her obvious physical gifts. She had appeared in our office one Thursday afternoon in late September, claiming to be a graduate student interested in our marketing strategies for a university research project she was conducting. She wore a short skirt and a tight sweater that left little to the imagination, carrying a notebook that remained conspicuously empty throughout her supposed research visit. Within an hour of her arrival, she was having an extended lunch with Richard at the expensive Italian restaurant down the street, their conversation lasting well into what should have been the afternoon's client meetings. Within a week, she was practically living in his penthouse apartment overlooking Navy Pier, her designer clothes gradually taking over his walk-in closet. Within a month, she had somehow convinced him to create a new position for her as Director of Client Relations, despite having no relevant experience beyond her communications degree from a small college in Wisconsin that most people had never heard of. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me or any of my more observant colleagues. While I had fought tooth and nail for every promotion, every small raise, every ounce of recognition in our competitive corporate environment, Brittany had waltzed into a senior position through charm, manipulation, and what could only be described as bedroom politics. Her starting salary was nearly double what I had been making after 3 years of exemplary performance reviews and consistent client satisfaction ratings. But I kept my observations to myself, focusing on my work and maintaining the professional demeanor my parents had taught me through their example of quiet dignity in the face of adversity. Respect is earned, not demanded, my father always said, though sometimes it seemed like the world had different rules for different people. Brittany made it clear from her very first day that she considered herself above the rest of us mere employees, despite her complete lack of qualifications or relevant experience. She would arrive late most mornings, usually around 10 o'clock, her designer heels clicking against the marble floors of our lobby like a countdown timer to some inevitable confrontation. Her lunch breaks stretched into hours-long shopping expeditions on Michigan Avenue or spa appointments at expensive salons where she got her nails done and her hair styled, all while the rest of us ate sandwiches at our desks and continued working through what were supposed to be our break periods. When she did attempt to work, it was with the air of someone doing everyone else an enormous favor, sighing dramatically at the inconvenience of having to actually perform job duties in exchange for her generous paycheck. Her interactions with other employees ranged from dismissive to openly contemptuous, depending on her mood and how much attention Richard was paying to her on any given day. She had a particular talent for making people feel small and insignificant, often interrupting conversations to redirect attention to herself or making condescending comments about other people's appearance, education, or background. The office atmosphere grew increasingly tense as employees learned to avoid her whenever possible, walking longer routes to their destinations rather than risk an encounter with her unpredictable temper and cutting remarks. The company's annual dinner was scheduled for a Friday evening in March, held at the Palmer House Hilton, one of Chicago's most prestigious and historically significant hotels. The Grand Ballroom, with its ornate ceiling featuring hand-painted murals and massive crystal chandeliers that had illuminated countless important gatherings over more than a century, had hosted presidents, celebrities, and captains of industry. For most of us middle-class employees, it represented the one night each year when we could pretend we belonged in such elegant surroundings, wearing our best clothes and dining on food that cost more per plate than we typically spent on groceries in a week. I had saved for months to buy a simple black dress that would be appropriate for the occasion, nothing flashy or attention-seeking, just professional and dignified in the way my mother had taught me to present myself at important events. The hotel's lobby was a masterpiece of architectural grandeur, with marble columns that stretched up to a ceiling decorated with intricate plasterwork and gold leaf detailing that caught the light from dozens of carefully positioned fixtures. The carpet beneath our feet was so thick and luxurious that our footsteps were completely silent as we made our way from the reception area to the ballroom where cocktails were being served before dinner. The entire atmosphere spoke of old money, established tradition, and the kind of success that most of us could only dream of achieving. The evening started smoothly enough, with colleagues mingling over cocktails and discussing quarterly reports, upcoming projects, and industry trends with the kind of forced enthusiasm that characterizes corporate social events where everyone is trying to make a good impression on their superiors. The hotel's atmosphere was warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the March wind that still howled outside the tall windows, rattling the glass and reminding everyone of the harsh winter that was finally beginning to loosen its grip on the city. I found myself relaxing slightly for the first time in months, enjoying conversations with coworkers I rarely had time to talk with during our busy workdays, learning about their families, their hobbies, and their own career aspirations within the company. Richard had arrived fashionably late with Brittany on his arm, and she looked absolutely stunning in a red dress that probably cost more than I made in 2 months of careful budgeting and frugal living. The dress was clearly designer, with a cut and fit that could only be achieved through expert tailoring and the kind of expensive fabric that moved like liquid silk. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect Hollywood waves that had obviously required hours in a high-end salon, and her makeup was flawless, applied with professional precision that highlighted her best features while concealing any hint of imperfection. She moved through the room like she owned it, accepting compliments and making small talk with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to being the center of attention wherever she went. The contrast between us couldn't have been more stark. While she glided through the crowd in her expensive gown, I stood near the bar in my simple black dress, nursing a glass of wine and trying to make meaningful conversation with colleagues who kept glancing over at her with barely concealed admiration and envy. It was clear that she had positioned herself as the evening's main attraction, and everyone else, including the hard-working employees who had actually earned their invitations to this event, were merely supporting characters in her personal drama. I was standing near the ornate mahogany bar, discussing market trends and economic projections with Jennifer from accounting, when Brittany approached our small group with the confident stride of someone who had been drinking steadily since arriving and felt invincible. She had been making her rounds through the party, collecting compliments and basking in the attention of male colleagues, who seemed to lose their ability to form coherent sentences in her presence. Jennifer, sensing the approaching storm with the intuition that comes from years of navigating office politics, politely excused herself to find the restroom, leaving me alone with Brittany for the first time since she had started working at the company and establishing herself as the unofficial queen of our corporate hierarchy. "Sarah, right?" she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, though she knew perfectly well who I was and had probably been planning this confrontation for weeks. "I've been meaning to have a little chat with you about something that's been on my mind." "Of course," I replied, maintaining my professional tone despite sensing trouble brewing like a storm over Lake Michigan, the kind that could destroy everything in its path if you weren't prepared for its fury. "What can I help you with?" "Well, I was looking at the employee records the other day. Richard lets me help with HR stuff sometimes, since I have such good people skills, and I noticed you have some kind of degree from Northwestern." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass that cut through the elegant atmosphere of the ballroom. "I mean, that's absolutely adorable. You probably think that makes you special or something, don't you?" The noise of the party seemed to fade around us as if someone had turned down the volume on the entire world. I could feel other conversations continuing, the gentle clink of crystal glasses, the soft jazz music playing from speakers hidden throughout the ornate room. But everything seemed muted compared to the sudden rushing sound in my ears as I realized what was about to happen. "I worked very hard for my education," I said quietly, trying to keep the conversation civil and professional despite the obvious provocation, hoping that maybe she would realize how inappropriate this conversation was and return to her table. "It required a lot of sacrifice from my family and myself." "Oh, I'm absolutely sure you did, sweetie," Brittany continued, her voice loud enough that people at nearby tables were starting to turn and look in our direction with curious expressions. But you know what's really hilarious about the whole situation? All that studying, all those student loans you probably still have keeping you awake at night, all those years of boring classes and homework and whatever else they make you do at those fancy schools. And here you are, still just pushing numbers around in a little cubicle like some kind of glorified calculator. Meanwhile, I walk in here with my communications degree from a school nobody's ever heard of, and boom, just like that, I'm already making twice what you make and I have my own office with a view. Her laughter was attracting more attention now, and I could see that several tables had stopped their conversations entirely to watch what was unfolding between us. Jennifer had returned from the restroom and was standing a few feet away, her face pale with embarrassment and uncertainty about whether she should intervene or pretend she hadn't witnessed this public humiliation. Other colleagues were starting to notice the commotion as well, their conversations pausing as they turned to watch what was clearly becoming a very uncomfortable situation for everyone involved. Education is about more than just immediate financial rewards, I managed to say, though I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and anger, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the room could hear it. It provides knowledge and skills that have value beyond salary. Does it, though? Brittany took a step closer, her expensive perfume overwhelming in its intensity, a cloying scent that seemed to match her personality perfectly. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like all that book learning didn't teach you the most important lesson of all, how the real world actually works. Some people are just naturally better at getting what they want through charm, personality, and knowing how to make the right people happy, and some people... She looked me up and down dismissively, her gaze lingering on my simple dress and modest jewelry. Some people spend their whole lives trying to prove they're worth something instead of just accepting their natural place in the hierarchy. The entire ballroom seemed to be watching now, conversations dying away as word spread that something dramatic was happening near the bar. I could see Richard across the room, engaged in what appeared to be an important conversation with some potential clients, completely unaware that his girlfriend was publicly humiliating one of his most reliable employees. The crystal chandeliers overhead cast everything in a golden light that somehow made the moment feel even more surreal, like a scene from a movie where the underdog is about to face their greatest challenge. You know what the real difference is between us, Sarah? Brittany's voice had taken on a cruel edge that cut through the elegant atmosphere like a knife through silk. I don't need a piece of paper hanging on my wall to prove my worth to anyone. I have natural talents and abilities that can't be taught in any classroom, no matter how prestigious or expensive it might be. Some people are just born with what it takes to succeed, and others. She shrugged dismissively. Others have to settle for being really good at math. That's when something inside me snapped, but not into anger or emotional breakdown as she clearly expected. Instead, I felt a cold, calculating clarity wash over me, the kind of analytical focus that my Northwestern education had indeed taught me very well. Sometimes the best defense isn't an emotional response, but a surgical strike delivered with precision at exactly the right moment, using facts as weapons and knowledge as armor. You're absolutely right, Brittany, I said, my voice calm and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Natural talent definitely can't be taught, and I completely agree that some people have abilities that others don't. Speaking of things that can't be taught in classrooms, I'm curious about something, and maybe you can help me understand it better since you have access to those HR records. She raised an eyebrow, clearly expecting me to back down, apologize, or perhaps start crying in front of everyone. The expression on her face was one of smug satisfaction, like a cat that had just cornered a mouse and was preparing to play with it before delivering the final blow. Do you happen to know what an LLC shell company is? I asked conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather or weekend plans instead of corporate financial structures. The question seemed to confuse her completely. What does that have to do with anything we're talking about? Oh, probably nothing at all, I continued, taking a sip of my wine and maintaining eye contact with her while I gathered my thoughts. It's just that your position as Director of Client Relations is technically funded through Henderson Consulting Partners LLC, which is a subsidiary company that Richard created approximately 6 months ago, specifically to handle certain discretionary expenditures that don't fit into the normal operating budget of Henderson Industries. I could see the confusion growing in her eyes, But I also noticed that several of my coworkers who had accounting and finance backgrounds were paying very close attention now. Jennifer, who had an MBA and years of experience with corporate financial structures, was looking particularly interested, her expression shifting from embarrassment to something that looked like anticipation. The interesting thing about shell companies from a financial analysis perspective, I continued in the same conversational tone, as if I were explaining a simple concept to a new employee, is that they allow business owners to separate certain expenses from their main company's books for tax and accounting purposes. It's perfectly legal, of course, but it does raise some interesting questions about the nature of those expenses and whether they constitute legitimate business costs or personal expenditures. I honestly have no idea what you're trying to say, Brittany said, but I could hear the first note of uncertainty creeping into her voice, the confident facade beginning to crack just slightly around the edges. Well, according to the detailed financial records that I help maintain as part of my job responsibilities, and you did mention that Richard lets you help with HR stuff sometimes, so I assumed you'd have seen these documents during your administrative work, your salary, your benefits package, your company car allowance, and even the lease payments on that beautiful BMW you drive are all paid exclusively through Henderson Consulting Partners, LLC, not through Henderson Industries, where the rest of us work and where our salaries come from client fees and actual business revenue. The room had grown noticeably quieter now, with many conversations stopping entirely as people sensed that something significant was happening. Even the jazz music seemed to have faded into the background, creating an atmosphere of tense anticipation. What makes this particularly interesting from a corporate finance and tax accounting perspective? I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the now silent space around us, is that Henderson Consulting Partners LLC has no clients of its own, generates absolutely no independent revenue, and exists solely for the purpose of paying your salary and associated expenses. In standard accounting terminology, that makes your position what we call a personal service expense, rather than a legitimate business operational cost that can be deducted as a normal part of running a consulting firm. Brittany's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, the confident color draining away as she began to understand the implications of what I was revealing to everyone within hearing distance. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked the conviction and cruelty that had characterized her earlier attacks on my education and background. "Actually, I do know exactly what I'm talking about, and I can prove it," I replied with a smile that was all politeness and zero warmth. "You see, that Northwestern degree you were making fun of included extensive and rigorous coursework in corporate finance, tax law, securities regulation, and advanced accounting principles. What I learned during those long nights in the library while my classmates were out partying is that when a company creates a subsidiary LLC solely to pay one person's salary and expenses, especially when that person is romantically involved with the company owner and has no relevant professional qualifications, it raises some very interesting questions for tax authorities and regulatory bodies." I paused to take another sip of my wine, letting the weight of my words settle over the room like fresh snow, pure and cold and impossible to ignore. Now, I want to be absolutely clear that I'm not suggesting anything illegal is happening here. Richard is completely free to spend his money however he chooses, and there are many legitimate business reasons for creating subsidiary companies. But I think you might want to reconsider the narrative that your position is based on merit, natural talent, or superior people skills. Because according to the financial records that I review and analyze on a weekly basis, your job exists entirely at Richard's personal discretion and personal expense, funded through what is essentially a private allowance, rather than earned through any measurable contribution to our company's actual business operations. The silence in our immediate area was now complete, broken only by the distant sound of traffic on Michigan Avenue and the gentle hum of the hotel's heating system. I could see understanding dawning on the faces of my colleagues as they processed what I had just revealed, their expressions shifting from curiosity to surprise to something that looked like respect. "In other words, Brittany, while I earn my salary through the work I do for actual clients who pay actual money for actual consulting services that help them solve real business problems, your salary comes from what amounts to Richard's personal entertainment budget. So when you say you don't need a piece of paper to prove your worth, you're absolutely correct. Your worth is demonstrated every month when Richard decides whether or not to continue paying your personal service fee, regardless of any measurable contribution you might make to our company's success or profitability." Brittany's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The confident, cruel woman who had been publicly humiliating me just moments before had been replaced by someone who looked lost and small despite her expensive dress and professional styling. The transformation was so complete that several people actually took a step back, as if her loss of confidence was somehow contagious. I hope that explanation helps clarify how the real world actually works, at least from a corporate finance perspective, I said with the same professional courtesy I would use when explaining quarterly reports to a client. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I see some actual clients across the room that I should go speak with. The people who pay real money for the services this company provides, which ultimately funds all of our salaries, including yours. I walked away from her slowly and deliberately, leaving Brittany standing alone in the middle of the grand ballroom, surrounded by colleagues who now understood exactly what kind of employee she really was, and what her position actually represented in terms of company structure and business legitimacy. The conversations around us gradually resumed, but I could feel the fundamental shift in atmosphere that had occurred. Word would spread quickly through the office, traveling through the informal networks that exist in every workplace. By Monday morning, everyone would know that the director of client relations was really just an expensive personal expense disguised as a legitimate business position. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, knowing looks, and quiet conversations with colleagues who had witnessed the exchange and wanted to express their support. Jennifer bought me another glass of wine and whispered that she had always suspected something wasn't quite right about Brittany's sudden hiring and rapid rise within the company hierarchy. Tom from our marketing department came over to shake my hand and tell me he had always respected my work ethic and analytical skills. Even some of the senior partners who had observed what happened made it a point to come over and engage me in substantive conversations about industry trends and company strategy, treating me with a level of professional respect that I had never experienced before in my 3 years with the firm. The transformation in how people looked at me was immediate and profound. Instead of being seen as just another junior analyst who kept her head down and did her work quietly, I had demonstrated that I possessed both the knowledge and the courage to defend myself when attacked, using intelligence and facts rather than emotion or personal attacks. The respect I saw in people's eyes wasn't based on fear or intimidation, but on recognition of competence and strength of character. Richard eventually noticed that something significant had changed in the room's dynamic, but by then it was far too late to contain the situation or control the narrative. I watched from across the ballroom as Brittany found him near the dessert table and whispered urgently in his ear. Her face flushed with embarrassment, anger, and what looked like panic. His expression grew increasingly troubled as she presumably explained what had transpired. His usual confident demeanor replaced by the look of a man who realizes that his personal decisions have created serious professional complications. When Richard finally approached me near the end of the evening, as guests were beginning to collect their coats and say their goodbyes, his usual commanding presence had been replaced by something that looked almost like respect mixed with wariness and perhaps a touch of fear about what other information I might possess. "Sarah," he said carefully, choosing his words with the precision of someone who understood that this conversation could have significant consequences. "I understand there was some kind of discussion between you and Brittany earlier this evening. Just a friendly conversation about education and its practical applications in the modern business world." I replied evenly, maintaining eye contact and speaking in the same professional tone I had always used with him. Nothing that wasn't already a matter of public record for anyone with access to the company's financial statements and the basic analytical skills to interpret them correctly. He studied my face for a long moment, clearly trying to determine whether I was threatening him or simply defending myself, whether this was the beginning of a larger problem or an isolated incident that could be managed and contained. "I see. And do you foresee any complications arising from this conversation in terms of our ongoing business operations or employee relationships?" "Not at all, Mr. Henderson," I said with a smile that was professionally pleasant but carried an unmistakable undertone of strength and resolve. "As long as everyone continues to treat everyone else with the professional respect that should characterize any successful business environment, I see no reason why any of this financial information would need to be discussed further or brought to the attention of outside parties. After all, how you choose to structure your various business expenses and subsidiary operations is entirely your prerogative as the company owner." The message was crystal clear. Treat me and my colleagues with the respect we deserve, and your personal business arrangements remain personal and private. Continue to allow employees to be publicly humiliated and professionally undermined, and things might become significantly more complicated from a regulatory and public relations standpoint. Richard nodded slowly, understanding perfectly the terms of our new professional relationship. I'm very glad we understand each other, Sarah. You're an extremely valuable member of our team, and I hope you know that your contributions to our success have always been deeply appreciated, even when that appreciation wasn't expressed as clearly or as frequently as it should have been. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I've always tried to bring my complete educational background and professional expertise to bear on behalf of the company's interests and our clients' success. I look forward to continuing that work in whatever capacity best serves our mutual goals. The following Monday brought changes that rippled through the Henderson Industries office like waves spreading across Lake Michigan after a stone has been thrown into calm water. The transformation was immediate, visible, and impossible for anyone to ignore or deny. Brittany's attitude underwent such a complete metamorphosis that some colleagues initially wondered if she had been replaced by an entirely different person over the weekend. Gone was the arrogant, dismissive woman who had treated the rest of us like servants, whose only purpose was to make her life easier and more comfortable. In her place was someone who seemed almost afraid to make direct eye contact with me or any of the colleagues who had witnessed our exchange at the Palmer House dinner. She began arriving at the office promptly at 8:30 every morning, her designer clothes replaced with more modest professional attire that wouldn't have looked out of place on any other employee. Her lengthy lunch breaks became actual 30-minute lunch periods, usually spent eating a sandwich at her desk while trying to catch up on work she had previously ignored or delegated to others. Most significantly, she began attempting to contribute meaningfully to client meetings and strategy sessions instead of simply occupying space and looking decorative while others did the actual work of running a consulting business. The change was so dramatic and so sudden that it became a topic of quiet conversation throughout the office. People who had grown accustomed to her imperious demands and condescending remarks found themselves dealing with someone who actually said please and thank you, who asked for help instead of demanding it, and who seemed genuinely interested in learning how to do her job properly rather than simply collecting a paycheck for existing. More importantly, from my perspective, Richard's treatment of me shifted significantly and in ways that benefited not just my career but my daily working experience. Within a week of the company dinner, he called me into his corner office to discuss what he described as a long overdue promotion to senior financial analyst, along with a substantial salary increase and expanded responsibilities that would allow me to work directly with our most important clients. "I've been reviewing your performance more carefully over the past few months," he said during our meeting, the Chicago skyline stretching out behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows that made his office feel like a throne room overlooking the city. "And I've come to realize that I may not have been fully appreciating the depth of knowledge and analytical capability you bring to every project. Your educational background clearly provides you with insights and expertise that benefit not just our internal operations, but all of our client relationships." I accepted the promotion graciously, though we both understood the subtext of our conversation and the new dynamic that now governed our professional relationship. Respect, once lost through neglect or poor judgment, is difficult to regain, but a healthy understanding of mutual interests and capabilities can provide an effective foundation for productive working relationships. The weeks that followed established a new equilibrium in our office dynamics that was healthier and more productive for everyone involved. Brittany continued in her role as Director of Client Relations, but with a much clearer and more realistic understanding of her actual position within the company hierarchy and her dependence on maintaining Richard's personal approval rather than demonstrating measurable professional competence. She began regularly asking me for advice on financial matters and client relationship strategies, treating me with a deference that bordered on nervousness but was certainly preferable to her previous arrogance and cruelty. When we encountered each other in the break room, elevators, or during meetings, our conversations were polite, brief, and focused on work-related topics, both of us understanding that the balance of power had shifted permanently and that certain lines of behavior were no longer acceptable. My colleagues' attitudes toward me evolved as well, but in ways that felt earned rather than imposed through fear or intimidation. Word of what had happened at the dinner spread through the office, but not in the gossipy, destructive way such stories usually travel through corporate environments. Instead, it became an example of how intelligence, preparation, and quiet strength could triumph over arrogance, assumptions, and the kind of bullying that had become unfortunately common in our increasingly competitive business culture. Junior employees began seeking me out for advice about their careers, their educational goals, and strategies for advancement within the company. Senior staff started including me in high-level discussions about client strategy and business development, conversations where my input had never been solicited before, but where my analytical skills and educational background could provide valuable insights. The respect I was now receiving felt genuine and sustainable, based on demonstrated competence rather than a single dramatic moment. The most significant change, however, was in my own confidence and self-perception. For years, I had allowed others to make me feel that my achievements were somehow less valuable because they came from hard work, sacrifice, and determination rather than natural advantages or inherited privileges. I had internalized the subtle message that my immigrant background and my family's financial struggles made me somehow inferior to people who had been given opportunities without having to fight for them. But that night at the Palmer House Hilton taught me that knowledge truly is power, and that the people who underestimate you often provide you with the greatest opportunities to demonstrate exactly why their assumptions are wrong and dangerous. My Northwestern degree wasn't just a piece of expensive paper that proved I could memorize information and pass tests. It was a weapon that had been forged through late-night study sessions and part-time jobs, through my parents' sacrifices and my own determination to succeed despite every obstacle that life had placed in my path. 3 months after the company dinner, Brittany's employment with Henderson Industries came to what was diplomatically described as a mutual end, though the circumstances made it clear that her position was no longer sustainable in the new office environment. Richard announced that the Director of Client Relations role would be eliminated as part of a company restructuring, with those responsibilities being distributed among existing staff members who had proven their ability to handle client relationships effectively and professionally. I was asked to take on several of those responsibilities, along with another significant salary increase and the new title of Associate Director of Financial Services. The promotion came with my own office, featuring a partial view of the Chicago River and the kind of respect from colleagues and clients that I had always earned through my work but had never been given until I stood up for myself and demonstrated that intelligence and integrity were more powerful than beauty and manipulation. On my first day in the new office, I carefully hung my Northwestern University diploma on the wall where everyone who entered could see it clearly, not as a boast or a way to intimidate others, but as a reminder to myself and anyone else who might be interested that education, dedication, and integrity will always triumph over superficial advantages and the kind of cruel assumptions that some people mistake for sophistication or worldly wisdom. Sometimes people mistake quiet competence for weakness, just as they confuse loud confidence with actual strength or ability. But true intelligence is like an iceberg. The most powerful and dangerous part lies beneath the surface, invisible to casual observers until the moment circumstances require it to emerge and demonstrate its full capacity for both creation and destruction. That evening at the company dinner, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and Chicago's business elite, Brittany learned too late that the quiet girl with the degree she had mocked possessed something far more valuable and permanent than physical beauty or sexual charm. I had acquired the knowledge and developed the character necessary to defend myself with facts instead of insults, with analysis instead of emotion, with the kind of quiet strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of achieving. The Chicago winter eventually gave way to spring, as it always does despite how endless and brutal it seems during the darkest months. The wind off Lake Michigan grew warmer and gentler, carrying the promise of renewal instead of the threat of hardship. The trees along Michigan Avenue began to show their first tentative buds, and the city came alive with the energy that comes when people can finally emerge from their winter hibernation and remember why they chose to live in this beautiful, challenging place. From my new office window, I could watch boats returning to the Chicago River, their owners eager to navigate waters that had been frozen and dangerous for months, but were now opening up to new possibilities and adventures. The view served as a daily reminder that persistence and patience always reward those who refuse to give up on their dreams, even when the path forward seems impossible. Looking back on that transformative evening, I realized that Brittany actually did me an enormous favor, though certainly not intentionally. Her public cruelty and unprovoked attack forced me to find my voice and use my education as the powerful tool it had always been, waiting for the right moment to prove its worth. She showed me that sometimes the best way to handle a bully isn't to sink to their level of petty insults and personal attacks, but to rise to your own level of competence and demonstrate why knowledge will always triumph over ignorance, regardless of how attractively packaged that ignorance might be. The months following my promotion brought opportunities one had never imagined possible during my years of quiet work in the cubicle maze. Richard began including me in high-level strategy meetings with potential clients, where my analytical skills and educational background provided insights that helped close deals worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. My reputation within Chicago's business community grew as word spread about the young financial analyst who could identify problems and opportunities that others missed, who brought both technical expertise and practical wisdom to complex business challenges. I began receiving invitations to industry conferences and professional development seminars, events where I rubbed shoulders with executives from Fortune 500 companies and learned about career opportunities that would have been unthinkable just a year earlier. The networking contacts I made through these events led to consulting opportunities outside of Henderson Industries, freelance projects that allowed me to build my own professional reputation while continuing my full-time work. My parents' pride in my success was overwhelming and deeply moving. During one of our weekly Sunday dinners at their small apartment on the south side of Chicago, my father, who had spent 30 years working as a janitor in office buildings downtown, told me that watching me succeed had made every late night and early morning worth the sacrifice. My mother, whose hands were permanently stained from years of cleaning chemicals, cried when I showed her the business cards with my new title and told her about the clients who specifically requested my expertise on their projects. The financial security that came with my promotions and salary increases allowed me to help my parents in ways that had previously been impossible. I was able to contribute to the mortgage payments on their small house, help them repair their aging car, and even start a small college fund for my younger cousins who were just beginning to think about their own educational futures. The cycle of sacrifice and opportunity that had defined my family's immigrant experience was finally beginning to pay dividends for the next generation. But perhaps the most significant change was in how I viewed myself and my place in the professional world. The young woman who had once felt grateful just to have a job and a steady paycheck had been replaced by someone who understood her own value and refused to accept treatment that fell below the standards of respect and professionalism that every competent employee deserves. I learned to speak up in meetings when I disagreed with proposed strategies, to advocate for my ideas when I believed they could benefit our clients, and to demand the kind of recognition that my work had always merited but that I had been too afraid or too conditioned to expect. The incident with Brittany became something of a legend within Henderson Industries, though not in the way she had probably hoped when she decided to publicly humiliate me. New employees were often told the story as an example of why the company valued competence over appearance, substance over style, and genuine expertise over superficial charm. It served as a warning to anyone who might be tempted to use their position or personal relationships to diminish others, and as encouragement to employees who might be struggling with confidence or recognition issues. 6 months after Brittany's departure, Richard hired a new director of client relations, this time conducting a thorough search process that included multiple interviews, reference checks, and practical demonstrations of relevant skills. The woman he eventually selected, Maria Gonzalez, held an MBA from the University of Chicago and had 10 years of experience in business development with respected consulting firms. She was professional, competent, and treated every employee with the kind of respect that should be standard in any healthy workplace environment. Maria and I developed an excellent working relationship based on mutual respect and complementary skills. Her expertise in client relationship management combined perfectly with my financial analysis capabilities, and together we helped Henderson Industries land several major contracts that significantly expanded the company's revenue and reputation. The partnership demonstrated what was possible when hiring decisions were based on qualifications rather than personal relationships or physical attractiveness. As my career continued to advance, I made it a priority to mentor other young professionals who reminded me of my earlier self, particularly those from immigrant families or economically disadvantaged backgrounds who might be struggling with confidence or unclear about how to navigate corporate politics. I started volunteering with local organizations that provided career counseling and educational support to first-generation college students, sharing my story and offering practical advice about everything from interview techniques to salary negotiation strategies. The mentoring work became one of the most rewarding aspects of my professional life, providing a sense of purpose that went beyond personal success or financial achievement. When I helped a young woman negotiate her first real job offer or encouraged a recent graduate to pursue advanced education despite financial obstacles, I felt connected to the larger story of opportunity and advancement that had motivated my parents to leave everything they knew and build a new life in America. During one particularly memorable mentoring session, I met with a 22-year-old woman named Carmen whose parents had immigrated from El Salvador and who was struggling with imposter syndrome in her first corporate job. She had graduated from a state university with a degree in business administration but felt intimidated by colleagues who had attended more prestigious schools and came from wealthier backgrounds. Her story was so similar to my own that I found myself sharing details about the Palmer House dinner and the lessons I had learned about the power of knowledge and self-advocacy. "The most important thing I can tell you," I said to Carmen over coffee in downtown Chicago, the same streets where my parents had once cleaned offices now serving as the backdrop for a conversation about professional empowerment, "is that your education and your work ethic are assets that no one can take away from you, regardless of their opinion about your background or their assumptions about your capabilities. When someone tries to diminish your achievements, they're usually revealing their own insecurities rather than exposing any weakness in your qualifications." Carmen's transformation over the following months reminded me of my own journey from hesitant analyst to confident professional. She began speaking up more assertively in meetings, volunteering for challenging projects that showcased her analytical skills, and eventually earned a promotion that came with both increased responsibility and significantly better compensation. Her success story became another example of how education, determination, and the courage to stand up for oneself could overcome initial disadvantages and social barriers. The passage of time provided perspective on the events that had changed my career trajectory so dramatically. What had felt like a moment of crisis and potential humiliation at the company dinner now seemed like exactly the catalyst I had needed to step fully into my professional potential. Brittany's attack had forced me to defend not just myself, but everything my education represented, everything my parents had sacrificed to achieve, and everything I had worked to become despite the obstacles that had been placed in my path. The confidence I gained from that experience extended beyond my professional life into every aspect of my personal development. I became more willing to take calculated risks, whether that meant pursuing advanced certifications that would enhance my expertise, speaking at industry conferences where I could share insights with other professionals, or even dating men who might have previously intimidated me with their educational backgrounds or social connections. The young woman who had once felt grateful just to be included was replaced by someone who understood that she belonged in any room she entered based on her own merits and achievements. 2 years after the infamous company dinner, I received an unexpected phone call from a headhunter representing a major consulting firm in New York City. They had heard about my work with Henderson Industries and were interested in discussing a senior analyst position that would come with a substantial salary increase and the opportunity to work with some of the country's largest corporations. The position would require relocating to Manhattan, but it represented the kind of career advancement that I had dreamed about during those long nights studying in the Northwestern Library. After careful consideration and extensive discussions with my family, I decided to accept the New York opportunity. The decision was difficult because it meant leaving behind the company where I had learned so much and the city where my family had built their American dream. But it also represented the fulfillment of possibilities that had seemed impossible just a few years earlier, when I was quietly working in my cubicle and accepting treatment that fell far below what I deserved. My farewell party at Henderson Industries was attended by colleagues from every level of the company, from junior analysts who had benefited from my mentoring to senior partners who had come to rely on my expertise for their most challenging projects. Richard gave a speech about the valuable contributions I had made to the company's success, but more importantly, he acknowledged that my departure represented a loss that would be difficult to replace. The respect and recognition I received that evening felt deeply satisfying, not because of any need for validation, but because it represented the full realization of my professional potential. As I prepared to leave Chicago for New York, I took one last walk along the Michigan Avenue corridor where I had spent so many lunch breaks during my years at Henderson Industries. The city that had once seemed overwhelming and intimidating now felt like home, a place where I had learned invaluable lessons about standing up for myself, using my education as a tool for advancement, and never allowing others to define my worth based on their limited understanding of my capabilities. The young woman who had been publicly humiliated at a company dinner had evolved into a confident professional who understood that knowledge, integrity, and courage would always triumph over superficial advantages and cruel assumptions. My Northwestern degree had proven to be worth far more than the money I had paid for it or the sacrifices my family had made to achieve it. It had become the foundation for a career built on competence rather than connections, substance rather than style, and genuine expertise rather than manipulative charm. The story I lived through serves as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that hard work has value that extends far beyond immediate financial rewards, and that those who underestimate others based on assumptions often discover too late that they have chosen the wrong target for their cruelty. In a world where image sometimes seems to matter more than substance, where social media presence can appear more important than actual achievement, it's both reassuring and empowering to know that knowledge, integrity, and quiet strength still have the power to prevail against all odds. Sometimes the most important lessons aren't learned in classrooms or from textbooks, but in moments of crisis when we must decide whether to accept humiliation or stand up for ourselves and everything we represent. That March evening in Chicago, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and business professionals who thought they understood how power worked, I learned that my education wasn't just about earning a living or advancing my career. It was about earning respect, including my own, and proving that intelligence and integrity would always be more valuable than beauty and manipulation. The transformation that began with a cruel comment about my degree and ended with a new understanding of my own worth continues to influence every aspect of my life and career. When faced with challenges or setbacks, I remember that evening at the Palmer House Hilton and the lesson it taught me about the power of knowledge, the importance of standing up for myself, and the ultimate triumph of substance over style. That memory serves as both armor and weapon, protecting me from those who would diminish my achievements while empowering me to reach for opportunities that once seemed impossible. And whenever I meet young professionals who remind me of my earlier self, struggling with confidence or unclear about their own value, I share this story as proof that education, determination, and the courage to defend yourself with facts rather than emotion can overcome any obstacle and triumph over any adversary, no matter how beautiful, charming, or well-connected they might appear to be.